Welcome to this week's astrology forecast. Today we're talking about Monday, May 26th through Sunday, June 1st, 2025. I'm excited to talk about this week. It's a very Geminian week. We're going to actually have more action in Gemini this week than any other week this year. And it's a pretty intense development that's just happened relatively recently. And by that I mean, if we look at the chart, so this is the chart for Monday, May 26th. If we go back just less than a week to Tuesday the 20th, there's only Jupiter and Gemini, no other planets there. So it's pretty interesting how just in the span of less than a week, we've had Sun, Mercury, and the Moon all join Jupiter in Gemini. So tons of Gemini energy, tons of Mercury energy this week. Not only do we have all these Gemini transits happening, but we're also going to have Mercury. Mercury's traveling so fast, it's actually going to catch up to the sun this week as well. And that's always pretty interesting whenever Mercury crosses over the sun. So we're going to talk about what that means. One last thing, too, if you haven't been following the astrology lately, which if you're here, I'm sure you probably have. But just in case, I did want to mention as well, if we go back to this May 20th chart that I have up, another major development that has just happened recently is Saturn has just changed signs as well. Saturn entered Aries on Saturday the 24th. So it's pretty wild just how different the chart looks just from 6 days before this week. So what that means is we've just experienced a huge shift. We've just experienced, yet another chapter, another page turning. We've really moved from a lot of yin energy that really occupied much of this spring, and we've transitioned to a lot more yang energy, specifically Gemini, but again, also Saturn joining Neptune in Aries. So this is part of a process that I've been talking about recently where the 2010s and the first half of the 2020s are very yin dominant. There's a lot of Capricorn, a lot of Pisces, and we even saw this spring had a decent amount of yin energy. We do have multiple planets in Aries, but we're seeing more and more as we start to enter the last half of this decade. We're going to see more and more yang planets, and the biggest transition is really this year. First there was Neptune entering Aries, now Saturn's entering Aries. The last part of this process will be Uranus entering Gemini. That's going to happen in July. But it's really exciting. I think it's personally exciting. I love yang transits. They are just so great for spontaneity and action. So for better or for worse, we're going to see a lot more spontaneity, a lot more action, not only this week, but even more so as we get further into this year and further into this decade. All the outer planets are eventually going to line up in yang signs. So we're just seeing that process kind of unfolding now. But in the midst of all that kind of long-term outer planet transit stuff that I was just talking about, we do get this kind of strange week of this like huge burst of Gemini energy. Really, Gemini is the star this week. The spotlight is on Gemini. So I would encourage you to look at any placements that you have anywhere in Gemini. Specifically if they are around 6 degrees Gemini, we do have a new moon happening there this week. So any placements around 6 degrees Gemini, any placements around 9 degrees Gemini, that's where the Mercury Cazimi will happen this week as well. So 6 or 9 degrees Gemini, but also, even if you have placements far out elsewhere in Gemini, really pay attention to those this week because Gemini is experiencing a huge wake-up call. Part of this has already happened and part of it is still developing this week. So it almost doesn't matter, where your planets are in Gemini or which planets they are, whether it's Venus or Mercury or any planet, whatever that planet represents that you have in Gemini, that's where you are waking up. You're experiencing a new chapter, you're experiencing a new beginning, etc. Okay, and I'm just going over my notes, making sure I hit all the bullet points. Just in general, this week, Moon will be transiting from Taurus through Leo, and depending on your time zone, Moon may actually reach Virgo by late Sunday, June 1st. I know it's pretty exciting. I think it's exciting this time of year. leaving Taurus, going into Gemini season. We're in that final third of spring in the northern hemisphere, so things are starting to feel a lot more like summer. I know they are where I live for sure. Um, where I live, it just happens to be like clockwork. Like the first day of spring feels very much like spring. The first day of Gemini, is starting to feel like summer now. So it's interesting how those connections happen. Anyway, let's go through the day by day forecast. I got a new microphone, by the way, so I hope that it's working. I haven't had the time to like play around with it and get familiar with it. For a YouTuber, I'm really not a very technological person, but I hope this is working for you. I'm trying to kind of improve the quality here, so I hope that works out for you. Okay, anyway, let's talk about Monday, May 26th, 2025. So this is the chart for Monday. I actually put the time. I usually do noon Eastern time, but this is actually 2 p.m. And the reason why is because I wanted to show you the chart. What the chart looks like with the moon in Gemini. With we have this stellium basically that I wanted to show you: Jupiter, Sun, Mercury, and the moon, all in Gemini. So huge focus on Gemini. The second focus after Gemini would definitely be Aries, in my opinion. Chiron, Venus, Neptune, and Saturn in Aries. So in other words, we have a definitely a qualified stellium in Gemini, but also a stellium in Aries as well. And 4 planets in Gemini, 4 planets in Aries. That really doesn't leave a whole lot left for the rest of the chart. Mars is still in Leo, Pluto is still in Aquarius, and that's it. There are no other planets at all, other than those two exceptions outside of Gemini and Aries. And even Mars and Pluto are in fire and air signs respectively. So we have a all yang chart with the exception of like the nodes and Lilith and some things like that. But Gemini and Aries in particular they're the first yang signs, right? Aries is the first sign traditionally. Gemini is the third sign. So these signs, even amongst their fellow fire and air signs, Aries and Gemini are very boisterous, right? They're very curious. They're very restless. It's hard for Gemini and Aries to sit still. They're kind of like children in a way. They want to explore. They want to try new things. They're pioneers. They're adventurers. So it's very clear that we're in some kind of new stage, some kind of new chapter, as I say. This week, Monday and Tuesday, I think will be the most pivotal. I think that's actually a really good word for what I was trying to say. Most pivotal for sure, just because we do start out the week with the new moon. So right off the bat, moon enters Gemini, and we will have a new moon at 6 degrees Gemini as well. So within the span of one day, moon enters Gemini, crosses Mercury. Actually, if I want to be really thorough, even in the early hours of Monday, May 26th, moon will actually cross over Uranus in Taurus, then enter Gemini, then cross Mercury, and then even catch up to reach the sun in the later hours of the day Eastern time. So that's pretty wild for the moon to cross over, for the moon to enter a sign and cross over 3 planets in one day, and for it to be a new moon as well. So again, that's just another indicator of new beginnings. Any kind of conjunction is always a new beginning. It's a new cycle, right? Especially around a new moon like this. So there's a lot going on. Earlier in the day, there may be some kind of realizations or awakenings with moon crossing over Uranus. It could also be changes to finances or like natural events, weather events, things like that. And then, just hours later, moon crosses over Mercury. So there's a lot of sudden frenetic energy, mercurial energy. We're learning, we're communicating, we're maybe overthinking things, overanalyzing. Mercury is, of course, in domicile in Gemini. So Mercury is very strong right now. Mercury is also traveling very fast, completely direct. So tons of Mercury energy, thinking, analyzing, communicating. Mercury is all about connection. So it has a lot to do with short distance travel, making those like literal connections with people around you or people, places in your vicinity, but also connections mentally as well, learning new things, branching out. Mercury loves to get new data and then share that data. So it's all about communicating both ways. So we're really just diving headfirst into all this Mercury kind of stuff. It's really interesting. But yeah, so this is happening at the same time as we're gearing up for this new moon, and this new moon is taking place today. So so th- they say, astrologers have said that there's two different beginnings to a sign. One beginning is when the sun enters that sign. That starts, like in this case, Gemini season, right? That happened last week. But the second sort of beginning is when the new moon happens in that sign, since we usually get one new moon in each sign during that season, sometimes two, rarely. Um, but so to have Sun enter Gemini and then less than a week later have the new moon in Gemini already, again, that's another indicator of a new beginning. We just had two, you know, initiating events of Gemini season, I guess you could say. So yeah, again, I think I talked about last week how Gemini is just all about expanding consciousness. It's a huge change from Taurus. Taurus is just so consistent. And, Taurus is that beautiful part of the middle of spring where everything is flourishing and things are just growing at a very strong pace, but it's also very steady. Once we get to Gemini season, I think we start to kind of just look around and realize, we've ideally learned to support ourselves in a more thorough way during the last season, during Taurus season. So now that we have that kind of support, now that we have that base, we can afford to sort of look around and explore a little bit, and that's where things get very variable, if that makes sense. Like with the mutable seasons in general, maybe even more so with Gemini. There are just so many, it's like the rules of karma are a little lighter, like gravity is lighter. You can kind of just, you can get away with doing different things, trying different things. Gemini is a dabbler, right? So Gemini wants to try everything. Gemini has order envy. Like Gemini, Gemini wants this, it wants that. It doesn't want to commit. It wants everything. It doesn't want to miss out on anything, right? So we're all kind of experiencing that in our own way during Gemini season. Um, let's look at this new moon. So 6 degrees Gemini. Of course, look to any placements you have around there. There could be some kind of new beginning there, especially with, reevaluating things, learning, thinking, communicating, things of that nature. In general, we may be writing more, learning more, listening more, communicating more, traveling more, etc. Um, but with this new moon in particular, the new moon does trine Pluto. I'm totally winging this, by the way. I didn't really look. There aren't a whole lot of intense aspects with the new moon, so I didn't look before. But the new moon does make a kind of loose sextile to Neptune and Saturn. Um, but the main aspect would be this trine to Pluto. So, it's not exact. It is about 3 degrees off. But it's close enough to be a trine. I always say with aspects with Pluto, a trine like this, a trine is very harmonious energy. Trine is the most stable, easy aspect you're ever going to get, basically. But with Pluto, you're making an easy, harmonious aspect with a planet that is intense and dark, right? So Pluto is still dark. Like, no matter how you dress it up, no matter what kind of aspect it is or what planet's making the aspect, in my opinion, in my experience, Pluto is still dark, right? So it's kind of interesting, this juxtaposition we have, because with all these planets in Gemini and all these planets in Aries, Aries and Gemini, in my opinion, are very, very childlike, as I said, they're very fun. I don't think they take things very seriously. Like Aries and Gemini want to have fun. They want that kind of immediate gratification. They're very childlike. I just think they're very fun energies. They want to have fun. They want to play, right? So having this trine to Pluto, we have all this fun, kind of just do what you want, play around sort of energy, but then also in the background, there's this aspect to this much more mature, dark, like long-term energy. Pluto's been retrograde at the first few degrees of Aquarius for a while now. So it's kind of interesting. We may just get a glimpse of like, um, how do I put this? Like sometimes Gemini, although Gemini I think is, this childlike energy I just described, its curiosity can definitely get it into some very heavy, intense places, and I think that's something that not everyone understands with Gemini energy. Gemini isn't it is light and playful, but then that light and playfulness, that energy itself takes it to heavy, intense places, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what this aspect reminds me of. Like, when you're just curious and just playing around and talking with people, or learning different things, learning tidbits and picking up different information and experiences, you just never know where that's going to get you. You may pick up on a much larger energy, much larger chunk, like a larger concept, or something like that. Something having to do with like power structures or how resources are shared. I do think this is going to be more of a background energy, though. Pluto, I don't think Pluto is dominating this entire aspect or this day, but it is there in the background, and it is being brought up by that aspect. So definitely worth mentioning. There is another aspect happening on Monday, so that would be Mercury. As Mercury reaches 1 degree Gemini, it sextiles Neptune. So Mercury's still within orb of sextiling Saturn and Neptune at the beginning of Aries. Um, so that's another aspect showing that we're picking up on much larger undertakings. Like, it's this really weird mix of, it's a bright and sunny new world, and we're out adventuring and exploring and having a great time. But multiple aspects to these outer planets, like picking up on. I'm almost picturing like I'm picturing us like on the surface, like playing around, like we're all children, kind of. But then some of us are digging, and some of us are touching on like these huge, like underground concepts, or like machines or something. I don't know. I don't know where that analogy is going, but it's like we're picking up on these like much larger things. So I think there's going to be a lot of variety with all that, if that makes sense. Like, depending on your astrology and how you are experiencing these transits, you may pick up on on very large concepts that may be personal to you, or maybe there are large concepts that do have to do with the world and society, but you may be picking up on different things than I would, or than someone else would, if that makes sense. But we are, in a weird way, we're learning about like the collective consciousness. We're learning about power structures, and by having this bright, sunny disposition, you can actually pick up on like some of the more heavier, kind of intense aspects of life, if that makes sense. So I think that's what Monday's about. So it's a weird Monday. It's weird to start off with this kind of energy. But on the plus side, I do like all this yang energy for Monday. I do like a new moon for Monday, kind of. Definitely a new beginning, which makes sense for the beginning of the week. Going to Tuesday, May 27th, everything just shifted because I used that different time for Monday for 2 p.m. But anyway, I do think Tuesday will still be pretty intense. Tuesday is kind of like a continuation of Monday, and that's largely because the moon is still in Gemini. So we still have 4 planets in Gemini. Moon is going to be sandwiched between the sun and Jupiter pretty much all day Tuesday, regardless of your time zone. So again, 4 planets in Aries, 4 planets in Gemini, tons of youthful energy, tons of playful energy. If you have a lot of like really heavy earth and water, and like maybe like Scorpio and Capricorn in your chart, this energy may be very annoying, or unfamiliar to you. You may feel like a stranger, like it's gonna be weird. But the more fire and air planets that you have natally, especially Gemini and Aries, the more at home you're going to be. So, whatever your astrology is, we can embrace this energy by being like Gemini, or maybe being like Aries to a lesser extent as well. Just play around. Don't take things too seriously. Gemini has a lot of fun. I do believe, because Moon is in joy in the third house, I think Moon is in joy in Gemini. There's that connection there. So, in other words, I do believe Moon actually. I think Moon in Gemini is the easiest transit. It's the most fun transit. I think that's a better way of putting it. So Moon in Gemini can be fun. Moon in Gemini allows us to be intuitive and detail oriented and sensitive, which the Moon loves all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, Gemini is detached. So Moon can play around with these normal faculties that it likes to have, or tends to have, but without all the heavy emotion that Moon typically deals with, if that makes sense. There's still all the sensitivity. You can still experience so much richness and so much detail, but without that like really heavy, intense emotion. So I think that's why Moon in Gemini is the most fun in general. So yeah, regardless of your astrology, you can hopefully enjoy that. There aren't a whole lot of aspects today, but again, these two stelliums are where I'm looking at, specifically the Gemini stellium. It's all about Gemini season, and it's continuing much of what I said for Monday. Anything else? I think that's it. Let's go to Wednesday the 28th. So there's a shift today, just after noon Eastern time. Moon leaves Gemini and enters Cancer. Before that, though, so much of the morning Eastern time, Moon will be hovering around Jupiter. It'll be crossing over Jupiter. So we get this like really fun, boisterous, expansive energy for much of the morning. And then in a way, this kind of just continues even afternoon Eastern time because when the moon enters Cancer, moon is at home in Cancer. Moon really thrives in this whole general area from, I would say, from Taurus all the way through Libra, if I'm being totally honest. So, but specifically Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, this is like the moon's kind of peak, if that makes sense. Moon was exalted in Taurus. I would say it's in joy in Gemini, and then now it's at home in Cancer. So on an emotional level, we're feeling grounded, we're feeling strong. Moon in Cancer is great because we know how we feel. Especially for those of you that have Moon in Cancer natally or other Cancer placements, Cancer is probably the sign that's most aware of its feelings, for better or for worse, right? But that is good because we know how we feel. Like sometimes half the battle is just knowing what side you're on, knowing how you feel about things. So we can be more secure and more, maybe a little bit more tribal with Moon in Cancer. What's interesting about this to me, though, is that there are no other water planets at all. Now that Saturn has left Pisces and entered Aries last week, we have no water planets. So Moon in Cancer is kind of just this short term, we get this little burst of water. Um, and in my chart for Wednesday and Thursday, or in my notes, uh, I wrote like balance chart question mark because I feel like Moon in Cancer, it's trying to like balance out the chart. It does a semi good job of this. As you already know, we have tons of fire planets, tons of air planets, and then now we have, we continue to have one planet in Earth, that would be Uranus and Taurus, and then now we have one planet in water, that's Moon in Cancer. So it's kind of like the moon is trying to balance things out. Moon is powerful enough that, especially in Cancer, that there is this kind of burst of emotion and sensitivity, which I think is actually really nice. I think it balances out this chart somewhat well. But things continue to still be lopsided in the yang direction in air and fire, of course. So Moon in Cancer, in other words, it's suggesting that we are suddenly more aware of our emotions. But it's almost like that emotionality doesn't really have a whole lot to connect with. Like Moon in Cancer would prefer to, let's just stick with what we already know. Let's be safe. Let's pick the safe option, the tried and true. Like let's just stay home or do something that we're already familiar with. But that energy, it's just Moon is it's the only one there. It's all alone, right? It has like nothing to even aspect with. All these other transits are saying like screw all that. Let's go out. Let's try something new. Screw what we're already doing. Screw I'm bored. Let's do something different. Let's do something new. So it's kind of a weird mix. Moon is trying to balance the chart, but it's the only one there. This will be nice though if you do have a lot of yin energy in your chart. If you have a lot of earth or water, Moon will at least support you. So at least you have like one thing on your side, if that makes sense. Um, but if you have a lot of yang energy in your chart, Moon and Cancer will just seem kind of like a moot point. Um, it's the only one saying its message, if that makes sense. And that continues through Thursday as well. I think the charts look pretty similar for Wednesday and Thursday. Moon is supporting our emotions in Cancer, but it's the only one doing so. Everything else is supporting Aries, Gemini, or Yang energy in general, uh, pretty much, with the exception of Uranus. Um, let's go to Friday because things do things change again on Friday. So in the afternoon Eastern time, Moon will leave Cancer and enter Leo. Not the worst sign. I think Moon probably fares better in Leo than it does any other fire sign. Leo can be warm and maybe nurturing, so Moon does okay there. But we do suddenly have a lot of fire again, right? Let me go a few hours ahead just so you can see. what the chart looks like with Moon in Leo. Um, okay, so yeah, technically Moon enters Leo around 5 p.m. Eastern time. But as it does so, now we suddenly have six planets in fire signs. So to me, just a few days ago, the main focus was Gemini. Now I would say the main focus is on fire signs, but also largely Gemini as well. But with Moon joining Mars and Leo, that does, make Leo and fire signs in general more of a focus, and it means that there's six planets in fire signs compared to three planets in, or four planets in air. Um, so anyway, still lots of yang energy, lots of spontaneity, but things are a little more fiery now, a little bit more intense. With Moon and Leo, things are more passionate, right? Also today, though, there is the Mercury Cazimi. So earlier in the day, Eastern time, Mercury crosses over Sun at 9 degrees Gemini, and Cazimis are interesting. They're not always what you'd think. Like, I think getting into astrology, we think that, conjunctions typically strengthen planets, right? Typically, when planets are at the same place, they become married, they become coupled, so they're in agreement. They are, supporting each other, right? It's a little bit different for the sun, though, and I've seen this many times with Mercury crosses over the sun very regularly, like at least several times a year. And the sun does not exactly strengthen planets that it conjoins, or that conjoin the sun. When Mercury crosses over the sun, how do I put this? Like typically with a conjunction, two stars, two traveling stars would conjoin and they become brighter, right? Because both their lights are shining together. It's a little different with the sun. When Mercury crosses over the sun, you can't see it at all. I mean, without some kind of technology, obviously just be staring at the sun. Mercury is going to be completely blinded out, and this is natural. Mercury always hovers around the sun, so this does happen a lot. I think I actually think this is why mercurial energies are usually more shy or nervous with a lot of attention. They like to be in the background, and that's because Mercury's used to being shadowed by the sun. That's like where it likes to be. But for us, with this transit, Mercury crossing the sun, it's almost like the sun comes along and like fries Mercury. Like it's like a what's it called when what's it called? Oh my god, I'm forgetting what it's called when like you have too much electricity and it fries everything. Right? I'm not gonna remember what it's called, but um, that's kind of like what this is like. There's too much voltage, too much energy, too much fire, too much electricity. So it just fries everything. So what that means for us is that there's almost too much mercurial energy, which, I mean, this especially makes sense since this is happening in Gemini. We may be so excited. We're taking on so many different activities. There's so much action coming at us from all different sides. This isn't like, for most of us, this is not going to be monumental action like whoa, my relationship is totally changing, or whoa, my work is totally changing. I mean, unless you have certain aspects in your chart, for most of us, it's just gonna be like every part of life. There's some kind of activity. Like there's change over here, change over there. So some of us may enjoy this. Some of us may be swept away with it, and we may be very productive. We may be learning a lot, but it can be too much of a good thing. We may be fried. We may not have enough time to do everything. There's too many tasks. There's too many like tabs open in your brain, right? So you're thinking about this. You're thinking about that. You're going over here. You're going over there. We can become like debased, I guess, if that makes sense. So whenever I see an aspect like this, I always say make sure you're getting your electrolytes, make sure you're staying hydrated, make sure you're resting and getting enough like slow time, because it's pretty natural for mercurial energy to like, it just wants more and more, and it just gets swept away with like all these tasks and all this productivity and all this learning. It sometimes does not prioritize rest. Slow, we need some kind of like slow time, if that makes sense, some kind of activity or pastime slow in nature, relaxing. And this is actually really essential specifically for mercurial energy, because if you're not like resting and integrating, if you're not resting, you're not integrating, you're not building that intuition, you're not going to see all the connections that you're making. It's just going to seem like all this data that's just thrown at you. You're not going to have time to process it. So I think, to go on a small tangent, I think that's why Mercury retrogrades so often. We need to go forward and go fast to learn a lot, but then we need to take breaks, we need to pause, we need to slow down, rest, sleep, drink water, go on a walk, whatever. Maybe read a book, something slow in nature, or I think everybody has something, whether it's like working out or golfing or something slow in nature that we can integrate and like process everything. And that's where Mercury is very analytical, but can be very intuitive as well. Mercury is great with seeing patterns, but if you're not slowing down, you're not going to see those patterns. So with this Kazemi, that's what my advice would be. It may be very common for a lot of us to feel burnt out today, to feel fried, I'm picturing like to feel overly caffeinated. That's kind of what this energy is about. Like you've had too much coffee, just slow down a little bit, chill out. Because this can actually be a little bit intense, especially with all this fire I was talking about earlier too. So yeah, in a weird way, Friday looks intense. None of these transits I would typically like. If I just took a really quick look at this chart, I wouldn't say it looks particularly intense. But when you combine all those fire planets and the Mercury Cazimi with the sun, there is some intensity there. We may feel burnt out. We may feel very dry. We need some water, very literally, with the lack of water in the chart, and with North Node and Pisces too. Shout out to North Node and Pisces. So that's showing like we need the water. We need to be grounded emotionally, or literally going back to this whole electricity analogy. We need to be grounded, right? So we don't. What happens if you're not grounded? You get electrocuted, something like that. I don't know. Let's go to Saturday, May 31st. So this continues. I would say this is another time where the chart for Saturday looks very similar to Friday. That Kazemi is quickly waning, though. I don't know if waning is the right word, but Mercury has crossed the sun. Mercury is traveling about as fast as it does. I forgot to mention earlier, Mercury is only going to spend 2 weeks, almost exactly 2 weeks in Gemini, from Sunday, May 25th through Sunday, June 8th. So yeah, Mercury is flying right now. And a quick side note there too, and this is just gonna echo what I've already said, but because whenever Mercury travels really fast, like at this part of its cycle, it means that we're learning a lot. And this is especially true since Mercury's in domicile in Gemini and the Sun's also in Gemini. It's all just stacking up to show that we are in a new chapter, we're in a new phase, and we are learning a crazy amount. We're experiencing a lot. We're having a lot of new experiences. I'm sorry, I just repeated myself, but it's just a lot. It's a lot of frenetic energy. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of new experience. So yeah, on the one hand, we are learning a lot, we're experiencing a lot, as I said, but on the other hand, there's just so much happening that we may feel overwhelmed, and whether you're overwhelmed or not, it's unlikely that you're actually digesting everything, and that's okay for this part of the cycle. In a few weeks we'll have Mercury prepare to go retrograde again, and then that'll give us a break where we can catch up and figure out everything we missed at this time when Mercury is traveling so fast. But this is just all part of the cycle, if that makes sense. But yeah, Saturday we continue to have Moon in Leo, 6 fire planets, 3 Gemini planets, 1 in Aquarius. So 4 air planets, 6 fire. Lots of yang energy, lots of new developments, lots of action. Yeah, just how are the yang signs in your chart? Where is Aries in your chart? Where is Gemini in your chart? Where is Leo in your chart, for that matter? That's where all this action is happening. It's definitely a lot of action for all of us somewhere. Okay, Sunday, Moon still continues through Leo. Moon crosses over Mars early in the day, Eastern time. So that gives us even more intensity. At this time, though, Mercury is a few degrees away from the sun. So that whole overly caffeinated, electrocuted energy I talked about for Friday, it does continue a little bit into Saturday, but I think it's mostly dissipated by Sunday. However, on the other hand, with Moon crossing over Mars in Leo, that is a different kind of intensity. Mars is pretty strong in Leo. We can be really stubborn, we can be fiery, and we can fight with endurance with Mars in Leo. So with Moon crossing over Mars, that may highlight these types of things. We may feel combative, or I actually really admire Mars in Leo. It's a very loyal placement. Um, I think I talked recently about how individuals who have Mars and Leo natally, they fight instinctively without hesitation, and they will fight as long as they feel it's necessary. So I really admire that placement. But anyway, with Moon crossing over Mars, we may be kind of up in arms. Like we may be very motivated by all these new experiences, this new information that we've just had recently, and we may feel more able to fight for what we believe in. We may be especially proud on Sunday. Moon and Mars and Leo can be intense, they can be combative, they can also be playful though as well. Leo likes to play, it likes to create. This energy could be very sexual as well, depending on how Leo falls in your chart or what placements you have there. Could be sexual for many of us, could be romantic. I just want to mention as well, we had Venus trine Mars last week. Yes, that's right, on Thursday the 22nd. So basically what I'm saying is, we're still kind of within orb of that Venus Mars trine, and especially as the moon is crossing through this area, passing over Mars, trining Venus, it's kind of bringing about that Venus Mars trine that we technically had last week. We're experiencing kind of an echo of that this week. So it could be romantic, could be fun, could be pleasure seeking. Um, what else? Because this is in fire signs, Venus and Mars and the moon to some extent are all about pleasure, and especially having them line up in fire signs like this, where we're being maybe a little selfish, a little hedonistic right now, and that's okay. Um, I think life is meant to be fun, at least part of the time, right? We like to play, we like to have fun. So that's largely what this is about. There is one kind of more serious aspect, and it has to do, it's actually involved with this kind of configuration. Venus crosses over Chiron at 25 Aries. You can see that up here. I like how I just decided to use my pointer like at the last day of the forecast. But I'm not used to it being visible. So I have a new computer, I've got a new microphone, so I'm getting used to all this technology. Like before, this pointer would only show up like half the time. Anyway, Venus and Chiron are conjunct at 25 Aries. Neither of them are particularly happy there. Venus is in detriment in Aries. I would actually say Chiron is kind of in detriment in Aries too. Um, if Chiron can be at home in Virgo but in detriment in Aries, that's kind of what I believe. But Chiron's a weird one. I'm aware Virgo and Aries are not exactly opposite, so that is a little bit, unusual. But anyway, Venus and Chiron, neither of them are, both Venus and Chiron are typically about empathy, right? They would prefer to be in Libra, where they can be all about, balance and, let's focus on other people. Let's be fair here. Let's do what's best for the common good or for the greater good. But with both Venus and Chiron in Aries, they neither are prioritizing those things. They are uncharacteristically self-focused. So in other words, with Venus and Chiron conjunct in Aries, we may be really favoring like what's right for me though. Like Chiron in Aries is very focused on like I've been through these wounds, and I've done this and I've done that, and I need to speak my truth. And with Venus there, it's just supporting, I have this kind of idea that wherever Venus is, that's what we admire. So with Venus and Aries, it's like we're admiring ourselves, our own journey, our own feelings and experience, our own passion. And specifically with Venus conjunct Chiron in Aries, we may really have a tendency, some of us more than others, may really have a tendency to get lost in our own fight. Especially if we feel like the underdog, like I'm fighting for what's right, I'm fighting the status quo, I'm fighting the establishment or the mainstream or what have you. Um, it's kind of like a David and Goliath. At least that's how we see it. I'm picturing, oh, what is that tarot card? It's wands. It's 10 of wands, 9 of wands. But it's like I'm fighting alone. It could be a different number, but it's a wands card. Anyway, it's like I'm fighting alone. I have to take this battle on myself, and I have to fight everyone else. That's kind of what this energy reminds me of, and it's only strengthened by the loose trine from Mars in Leo and an exact trine from Moon at 25 Leo, um, sometime early afternoon, like Eastern time. So in other words, I'll just give you the pros and the cons, and then I'll move on. The con is that we may feel like we're fighting alone, even if maybe you aren't actually alone, but you feel like you have to fight this battle alone. I think this can be, what's the word, like misleading. Um, Maybe there are others who share your journey or who understand what you're going through, but you're like so focused on your own journey that you don't see that. Or maybe this like big, monster, this giant that you're fighting, maybe it's not actually a foe, maybe it's not actually a threat, or maybe there's a more productive way, a more logical way to go about it. Maybe some kind of compromise can be reached, but we're so like focused on our own trauma and passion that we don't see all that, right? On the other hand, this energy could be necessary though. Maybe you truly are fighting something and you do need that boost. I think by focusing on ourselves, we can be more confident and more passionate. So depending on the situation, like this is a very fiery energy. So is that fire actually called for? That bravery, that cockiness, that maybe selfishness, is that called for? It may or may not be called for depending on your chart, depending on your situation, and depending on whether you have placements at 25 Aries or secondarily 25 Leo. If you do have placements there, you're really going to relate to everything I'm saying around Sunday. If you don't have a lot of placements around 25 of the fire signs, this may be kind of just a background energy. It may be fleeting. It's going to be a lot stronger for some people than others. Yep. Okay. And then things do change pretty quickly Sunday night as Moon leaves Leo and enters Virgo. So that's a completely different energy. I'm going to pretty much leave that for next week because since that is so late in the day, and depending on your time zone, you may have Moon and Leo all day Sunday. But yeah, that's what I have for you for this week. It looks like a really interesting week. Next week we move on into June, and we'll get a quarter moon that's going to really shake things up, and then we'll have two planets change signs, so more changes on the horizon as well. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this forecast. Let me know if you want a reading or if I can help you in any other way. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and have a great week.